Ben, tu sais, puis il peut toujours le tilter up un petit peu. C'est juste sur l'ego, là, tu sais, quand t'as le micro dans le... So it's very self-counting things that
Yeah, yeah. Well, the rest
There you
of us are
go.
too.
Here we go.
So what happened there?
Well, I've had my third meeting with either the Deputy Prime Minister or a Prime Minister, or both, this week. And so I really appreciate, on behalf of not just the City of Edmonton and its people, but also local governments united through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, all of the direct access that we've had since the election, since the cabinet was sworn in. I think Canadians expect results from this Parliament and from this federal government, and they expect practical solutions to some of the challenges, whether it's climate change, whether it's affordable housing, or whether it's economic diversification and resiliency on the prairies. And so we covered all of those topics in our many discussions this week. And I really appreciate the Prime Minister's willingness to entertain direct relationships with local governments to get things done, ideally in partnership with provinces, but also the willingness to work directly to us and to work with us to bring our premiers back to the table to get those results for people we all serve. And we also did have an excellent conversation about Western alienation and issues on the prairies and the municipal sector's response. I was able to brief him on the first in-person meeting of the Western Economic Solutions Task Force of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which went very well yesterday. So urban and rural leaders from now BC to Manitoba got together to emphasize a work plan with priorities that will look at everything from market access to economic diversification to trade barriers, and how local governments can help with the complex issues of achieving our country and the world's environmental goals while getting the most of the resources that we produce for the world today, whether it's food or whether it's energy. And so very fruitful conversations, the beginning of a big body of work that the federal government is very interested to hear solutions from local leaders. And I think we can depolarize some of the conversations that are happening, not fall into the wedges and the traps that are unfortunately making these practical issues for people and businesses who are hurting, that they're increasing anxiety. And we have an opportunity as local government leaders to do what we do best, which is build consensus, build coalitions, raise the level of debate. And I think the federal government's very open to solutions that our task force is going to bring forward.
Your colleague from Calgary was here last week, and he was saying that we shouldn't underestimate Alberta's anger. Do you have the same feeling up in Edmonton that anger is really as serious as Mr. Kenney is saying?
So there's some anger on the prairies, and there's always some anger everywhere. But I can assure you, first of all, that I'm a Canadian first, and that there is very little, if any, interest in any of this separatist or divisive discourse in Edmonton, or as near as I can tell among Northern Albertans. But speaking for Edmontonians, I think we're very interested in making Confederation work. We're very interested in this country's success, which is Alberta's success, which is Edmonton's success. And so I think there is anger, but I think that anger comes from anxiety and fear about economic uncertainty. And I think this is why we need a strategic partnership through initiatives like the West Task Force, where local government leaders can bring solutions forward to the federal government and provincial governments. And ideally, all three of us can work together, along with Indigenous organizations and industry, to actually make life better and inject some hope, which is really the antidote to this anger and creates the rife conditions for the divisiveness that is being exploited for narrow and short-term political reasons.
So what do you expect from the Premier's meeting on Monday, or if anything?
Well, I think it's been interesting to see the rhetoric shifting from a number of premiers over the last little while. I think Premier Ford's comments about working together and finding ways to support the success of Albertans and Alberta businesses and supporting and strengthening this country were very well received. His desire to work with the Mayor of Toronto in a collaborative way is refreshing to hear. Likewise, I sat next to the Premier of Manitoba at the Grey Cup, and the Mayor of Winnipeg was very close by, and we all took a picture together wearing Bombers gear, and they seem to be working together much more collegially as well. And I really appreciated Premier Pallister's comments about this country and pulling together and putting aside the divisive rhetoric. So I think there's a tone shift among the premiers, and it would be great to see a consensus from all the premiers that we need to work together to deliver on economic, environmental, and social results, working with all orders of government and Indigenous partners, because I think that's what Canadians expect. And I think the premiers have an opportunity to dial down the rhetoric and raise the level of debate next week.
But then there was that.
Coming from your premier, what is your specific role, I guess, sitting in the midst of this with a premier that's very upset in Alberta, and yet you seem to have a good relationship with the Trudeau government?
Well, I think in any situation where you have polarization, you need a third actor to come in, and I think that's where local government, as the third order of government, the one closest to people that hears their anxieties but also has to deliver practical solutions and can't get away with blaming others for real complexities and challenges we're dealing with. I think we have an opportunity to depolarize this, and we've reached out to provincial governments and provincial representatives about the opportunity to work with our Western Economic Solutions Task Force, because ideally, a true economic diversification strategy for the West would involve necessary partnerships with provincial governments who control a lot of the levers. So I think we have the opportunity to communicate, in my case, Edmontonians, but also Albertans, and Saskatchewan residents and Manitobans and British Columbians desire through their local government representatives that we all need to get back to work and get solutions.
So what are the solutions? Did you have any ideas about how to offer hope? You talk about anxiety in the energy sector. Are there any concrete ideas out there?
Sure. So, I think one of the most pressing questions for many people on the prairies is TMX actually happening? And I believe it is, because of the Prime Minister has assured me personally, and I believe him, that they wouldn't have bought it if they didn't intend to go ahead. And Minister Sohi, former Minister Sohi, is a longtime Edmonton City Councillor, we were elected together, in his work with First Nations in the West and with the energy industry to get that pipeline through all of the complex regulatory and consultation requirements. I believe very sincerely, and I had dinner with him last week, that he did that work because the government is committed and he was dispatched to get the project to the finish line. So I believe, even though there are still voices saying it'll never happen and casting doubt over that, which adds more anxiety, that this federal government means to build this pipeline, and that when shovels go in the ground and workforces are spooling up now to do this, that will quell some of the anxiety, because I think they did mean it all along, and it's actually a shame that there's still some doubt about that.
Isn't TMX hiring people? Isn't TMX right near where you are?
Yep.
Can't you just go over and look at it?
No, they're setting up and getting ready to go. They've got to conclude one last legal matter, but again, Minister Sohi, who I know personally and believe strongly in his integrity, worked very hard on a mission to deal with all of those questions and concerns from First Nations in a respectful way. That's who he is, and it's unfortunate he didn't have a chance to continue his work, but that's what the voters of Edmonton Millwoods decided. But I absolutely believe that he did that work sincerely, and that his important role in delivering TMX will be honored in time.
Will that do a long way to deal with Western alienation, or do you still have to deal with the bills that C-69, C-48 that are problematic in the West? So
I think we've heard from Minister Wilkinson and from the Prime Minister that there's a willingness to take feedback from industry and from producers and from local elected officials and even from premiers about the implementation of C-69. So that's one of the things the task force will look at, is whether there's some tangible things that that could go some way to ameliorate some of the anxiety that arose from that legislation. And so I think there's openness, and I think there's room for constructive discussions. But in the long term, I think the bigger question is, you know, in 30 years from now, when the world is using a lot less of our hydrocarbons for fuel, hopefully they're still using them for plastics and advanced materials and other things, but as the global demand shifts around conventional energy and unconventional energy, what are Albertans and people in Saskatchewan and northern BC going to be doing for a living? And I think that long-term economic vision is what we have an opportunity through our West Task Force, and ideally working with provinces and the federal government to articulate a hopeful future so that my kids, when they're my age, have jobs. Because we can't assume that the jobs that are there today are necessarily the jobs of the long term. We need to get the most out of our resource economy today as the world makes that transition, and so that we can get a world price for our products, so that we can invest those dollars in economic diversification, so that when the world's energy mix changes, we're still relevant in the world economy.
Did you discuss C69 with Mr. Trudeau this morning?
Only at a very high level as part of the West Task Force.
And to get back to the tone shift that you hear in the premiers, you did see Sir Pallister's ad yesterday.
I did, yes.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the City of Edmonton, and speaking only for the City of Edmonton and not because the big city mayors have never discussed this at a national level, but certainly the City of Edmonton, our council unanimously adopted a resolution opposing Bill 21 on the grounds that it is a breach of a fundamental right that is near and dear to all Edmontonians, particularly people of faith, of diverse faiths. And so I think we've taken an unequivocal position on that.
But how is that helping in, you know, working together, not being stopping the divide between Quebec and the West?
Well, I think you know, there are some things worth putting aside so you can get on with work, but I think human rights issues are worth standing up for and having something to say about. And there was real anxiety within a number of our faith communities about whether this might spread to other parts of the country. And I think, you know, Quebec has the constitutional latitude to do this, but I think other parts of the country and cities have the latitude to say that we think it's wrong.
Can I just ask you to kind of maybe summarize how you think about the Prime Minister's approach to the West and everything? He was shut out of Alberta and Saskatchewan. What do you think overall of his way to deal with it, with whether it's Chrystia Freeland or just
Sure.
in general?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's, one of his first comments to us yesterday was that he really appreciated the formation of our West Task Force, looked forward to hearing advice from local government leaders. So he wasn't putting it all on Minister Freeland, though of course she has a pivotal role. And so I think he's taking a multi-pronged approach, and certainly I know my big city mayor colleagues have appreciated the chance to speak to the Prime Minister and to his ministers. But the Prime Minister was also telling me about a phone call with the mayor of Lloydminster, which is an agriculture and oil and gas town about 2 hours east of Edmonton that is really struggling right now. And I encouraged him to continue having those conversations with people who are on the front lines of that economic anxiety in Alberta, and that outreach, one-on-one and through the associations of municipalities and to mayors of communities of all sizes, is going a long way to send a signal that Ottawa is interested in hearing about the challenges and interested in hearing practical solutions from organizations like the Federation of Canadian
Is this
Municipalities.
your first one-on-one with the Prime Minister, or have you had many?
No, we've had many.
You've had many?
Yeah, since before he was Prime Minister, actually.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Super. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.